In March 2023, 4 engineers quit their cushy jobs at Meta, Palantir, and other top tech companies to do something that seemed absolutely insane: compete head-to-head with Microsoft in the code editor market. Microsoft's VS Code was used by over 70% of developers worldwide. It was completely free. It had a decade of refinement. And it was backed by one of the world's most powerful tech companies. 2 years later, that tiny startup, Cursor, has hundreds of thousands of developers willing to pay $20 a month for their product, while Microsoft scrambles to catch up. This is the story of how a 4-person team beat a tech giant with infinite resources. It's about timing, architecture, and why sometimes being small is your greatest advantage. Michael Truel, Swaleh Asif, Arvid Lunemark, and Aman Sanger weren't just random engineers, they were exceptional ones working at the cutting edge of tech. And in early 2023, they all noticed the same thing. GPT-4 had just launched, and it was surprisingly good at writing code. But here's what was broken. Developers were copying code from ChatGPT, pasting it into VS Code, then going back to ChatGPT to ask for changes, then copying and pasting again. It was like using a smartphone to take notes, then manually typing them into your computer. The workflow was completely ridiculous. GitHub Copilot existed, sure, it could autocomplete code one line at a time, but it felt like a feature, not a revolution. It didn't understand your entire code base. It couldn't make sophisticated changes across multiple files. It was just fancy autocomplete. The 4 engineers had a radical insight. What if you didn't add AI to a code editor? What if you rebuilt the code editor from the ground up to be AI native? Not AI as a feature, AI as the foundation. So they quit their jobs, founded a company called AnySphere, and started building Cursor. Now came their first massive decision. And this decision would determine everything. They could build a brand new code editor from scratch. That would take 2 to 3 years, and they'd be competing against VS Code's decade of polish and thousands of features. They could build a VS Code extension, but extensions are limited, they can't access core functionality, they can't deeply modify behavior, they're constrained by AP is designed for safety, not innovation. Or they could do something controversial, fork versus code itself. Forking meant taking VS Code's entire code base, copying it, and modifying it themselves. They'd get all of VS Code's maturity and stability, all of its extensions would work. Users would find the interface familiar. But they'd also inherit a massive technical burden. Every time VS Code updated, they'd need to merge those changes into their fork. Most developers thought this was a terrible idea. Maintaining a fork is brutal, ongoing work. But the Cursor team saw something others didn't. Forking gave them something impossible to get any other way. Deep access, the ability to modify core editor behavior, the power to rebuild fundamental assumptions about how a code editor should work. GitHub Copilot was stuck building on top of VS Code. Cursor could rebuild VS Code itself, and they chose to fork. And that decision is why they won. But winning wasn't obvious at first. In fact, they almost went broke. Here's the problem. Every time a user typed into Cursor and got an AI response, that cost them money. GPT-4 API calls aren't cheap. A power user could easily cost them $50 a month in API fees. But they were only charging $20 a month for unlimited usage, and the math didn't work. Every successful user made them lose money, and so they got creative. They built a multi-model architecture. Simple suggestions used cheap, fast models. Complex requests used GPT-4. They cached aggressively to avoid duplicate API calls. They fine-tuned their own smaller models for common tasks. And they negotiated better rates with OpenAI as their volume scaled. But the unit economics were terrifying. If they grew too fast, they'd burn through their funding before they could fix their cost structure. Then there was the trust problem. Developers are paranoid about code quality. How do you convince them to trust AI-generated code in production? Their solution was transparency. Every change was shown before it was applied. Every edit could be undone with one keystroke. The AI's reasoning was visible. And critically, the Cursor team used Cursor to build Cursor. They dogfooded their own product constantly. If they didn't trust it for their own code, why should anyone else? Summer 2023, they launched their first killer feature, Tab Autocomplete. This wasn't like GitHub Copilot's line-by-line suggestions. Tab understood your entire codebase. It knew your coding style. It predicted multi-line blocks of code that actually compiled and made sense in context. Developers started experiencing something magical, flow state, with AI. The autocomplete was so good it felt like the editor was reading their minds. But the real game changer came in fall 2023, Command K. Here's how it worked. You select any piece of code, you press Command K. You describe what you want in plain English, and you watch it happen. Make this function async, done. Add error handling, done. Refactor this to use the repository pattern, done. This wasn't autocomplete. This was conversational code editing. This was telling the computer what you wanted and watching it happen in real time, but even Command K wasn't their ultimate weapon. Their ultimate weapon was codebase-wide understanding. Using embeddings and retrieval-augmented generation, Cursor could understand your entire project, not just the file you were looking at. Everything, every function, every class, every dependency, every architectural decision. You could ask it questions. Where is user authentication handled? It knew. You could request changes. Update all API calls to use the new error handling pattern. It could modify dozens of files consistently. This was the iPhone moment. Once developers experienced codebase-wide AI assistance, they couldn't go back to single-file autocomplete. It felt like going from a smartphone back to a flip phone. So why couldn't Microsoft, with all their resources, just copy this? Because they were trapped by their own success. First, GitHub Copilot was built as a VS Code extension. Extensions can't access core editor functionality. They can't modify fundamental behavior. Copilot was trying to be a motorcycle, but it was legally required to be a bicycle with attachments. Cursor forked the bicycle and built a motorcycle. Second, Microsoft made VS Code free to win market share. They couldn't start charging for it without alienating 15 million developers. Their monetization was GitHub Copilot as a separate subscription, but that meant two different products, two different teams, organizational politics, and integration constraints. Cursor was one product, one team, one vision. Third, Microsoft couldn't move fast and break things. They had 15 million users depending on stability. Every change needed legal review, accessibility compliance, security audits, and international rollout planning. Decisions that Cursor's 4 founders made in hours took Microsoft months of meetings. Fourth, Microsoft was optimizing for backward compatibility and supporting every possible use case. Cursor optimized for one thing, making developers ridiculously productive with AI. And finally, Microsoft suffered from the innovator's dilemma. They'd invested years in Copilot's architecture. Admitting that a startup had a better approach meant acknowledging internal failure. Pride and institutional inertia prevented them from radically changing direction. Microsoft had infinite resources, but Cursor had something more valuable: freedom. Freedom to rebuild everything from scratch, freedom to make decisions in minutes, freedom to focus on one problem, freedom to break things and iterate fast. Being small wasn't their weakness, it was their superpower. But now, in early 2025, Cursor faces real threats. Codium launched Windsurf using the exact same strategy, forking VS Code with even more autonomous AI features. They're well-funded, experienced, and their free tier is more generous than Cursor's. Anthropic launched Claude Code, a terminal-based agentic coding tool that can autonomously navigate code bases, run tests, and fix bugs. The playbook Cursor used to beat Microsoft is now being used against them. So how do they stay ahead? First, they're moving up market. Enterprise customers pay more, churn less, and create switching costs through team integrations and compliance requirements. Second, they're building a multi-model strategy. Cursor supports GPT-4, Claude, and other models. They're not competing with Claude Code, they're integrating it. They're becoming the Switzerland of AI coding tools. And third, they still have the velocity advantage. Windsurf is part of a 60-person company now. Claude Code is from Anthropic with 700 employees. Cursor can still iterate faster than larger competitors. And fourth, they have something new. Competitors don't. Data. Millions of hours of developer interactions teaching them what works, what doesn't, what features matter, and what UX patterns create flow. Data compounds. The longer Cursor exists, the better their product gets. But here's the truth. They might not stay number one forever. The market might fragment. A new paradigm might emerge. Microsoft eventually ships deep VS Code integration. Windsurf's agentic approach proves superior. Voice coding or brain-computer interfaces change everything. The story of Cursor isn't really about code editors. It's about one of the fundamental truths of innovation in tech. Resources don't guarantee victory. Speed, focus, and structural advantages do. 4 engineers with an idea beat Microsoft with 100,000 employees and $200 billion in revenue. Not because they had more resources, but because they had more freedom. They could rebuild from scratch. They could iterate in days instead of months. They could focus on one problem instead of managing competing priorities. They had nothing to lose and everything to prove. That desperation, that hunger, that absolute focus, that's what wins. Whether Cursor maintains that advantage as they scale, that's the real test. That's the challenge every successful startup eventually faces. How do you keep the speed and focus that made you win when you're no longer the scrappy underdog? We're about to find out. And that's what makes this story worth watching. This is the Cursor story. For now, the race isn't over, it's just entering a new lap.